Today we're going to do my Masters Bangkok Final Four pick'ems because, of course, we've only got these couple teams left. And what we're going to do today is run through the two games that we definitely know are happening, run through what the map vetoes look like, then just talk generally about some of the teams and, how it shapes up versus other teams and all that kind of stuff, and talk about eventually who's going to win Masters Bangkok. Okay, so what I've got here is a list. We're going to go EDG versus T1, and here down the left is what I see as EDG's map pool. Now, the little lines in between basically denote a tier gap, right? So for instance, here for EDG, their Fracture and Haven is really, really good, right? Then you've got a bit of a gap to their Bind, Pearl, and Split, which are all good maps in my opinion. Then Lotus has been a bit shaky for them, I'm not going to lie this year. And then you've got here at the bottom their Permaban Abyss, and these little asterisks here denote how many times in Masters Bangkok they have banned that map. So you can see for EDG, they have only banned Abyss, that is their Permaban. So this is how I see kind of EDG's map pool. Two very, very good maps, three maps that are still pretty good, to be honest. A map that, I mean, they've been shaky on, but would it shock you if EDG went back and, won on Lotus? Of course, we saw it at Champs that their Lotus was one of their strongest maps. So would it be absolutely shocking if EDG managed to, pull it out of the bag on Lotus? No, not really. And then Abyss is their permaban. And they're coming up against T1, and the same thing is happening here on the right hand side for T1. You can see that they've banned Abyss 3 times, and here you've got Pearl and Lotus as two maps that T1 are really quite good at. Those are two maps that they are clearly pretty strong on. Then you've got a double line here, which means that there is quite a bit of a gap to basically the rest of their map pool, right? Which I would call the rest of their map pool is kind of okay, but not necessarily, dominant. Right, it's not good. They're just okay at perhaps all of these maps, and you could really order these maps in quite a few different ways if you wanted to. But as we go through the map vetoes for these teams, one thing you may notice is that they have the same permaban, and that makes map vetoes very, very strange and very, very interesting a lot of the time, because it basically becomes a game of chicken. Who's going to ban the map, or are neither of you going to ban the map? Especially when there's been a couple days of, rest, where maybe both teams could prepare Abyss for their opponent as well. It's quite interesting. Now, if we are to do a map ban, as I'm about to do, I don't think EDG would ban Abyss, because of the two teams that have played Abyss, we've both seen them play it once when they were forced to in their grand finals in their regions, and EDG actually won on Abyss and T1 looked dreadful. So I would think that EDG would probably feel more confident in their Abyss than T1, and so I've got them here banning Lotus instead, which hasn't been a great map for them, and is a good map for T1. But for T1, and again, this is where it gets tough to know, will they work on their Abyss? But I think they would look at it as our Abyss was truly shocking. So I do just have them banning Abyss, which I think personally would be a mistake if they do this. I kind of hope that T1 don't do this. I kind of hope that they ban like a Fracture instead, right? That I think would be better for them. But I'm not sure if they will actually do that. So let's go ahead with this as our map veto. I think if that did happen, then EDG would definitely pick Fracture, right? If that was open to them. We saw them against G2 look very good on Fracture, so that makes sense, right? For then T1, obviously Pearl is up here at the top of their map pool. I think that would be a slam dunk, pick for them. Then we enter obviously the second ban phase, and here for EDG, this is where this map pool gets quite interesting, because other than Haven, I'm not sure there is, like, all of these maps are kind of, Bind and Split are kind of okay for both, so I think that EDG might just get rid of Split, but they could get rid of Bind and it wouldn't shock me. And for T1, I think getting rid of Haven makes the most sense, but honestly, they might even think about playing Haven as well, feeling like it maybe is the best. I've put it as the best of their okay maps, so they might want to try EDG on Haven, but I do think that is, a little suspect, and I think that Bind would make sense. Bind or Split, to be honest, makes sense as a map 3 in this one. And I think when you look at this map veto and how it might go, a lot will hinge on whether, which team does ban Abyss, because whoever doesn't is going to have a pretty big advantage. But I do think that EDG probably have just enough better maps than T1. I do think that this like double line here of these maps just aren't as strong as these maps for EDG. And so I do think that EDG probably should be looking at like a 70-30 kind of game here, 65-35, something like that. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to toss a weighted coin. So I said that EDG had a 70-30 chance of winning the map. Well, let's toss a coin with a 30% chance of getting a tails. So tails is T1, heads is EDG, and the coin says heads. So it will be EDG winning. Now for the second game, Vitality versus G2, this is what I've got as Vitality's map pool, which is incredibly hard to rank because you can put these three maps, I think, in any order, and you can put these three maps in. I mean, I literally spent a long time looking at these three maps for Vitality and being like, I have no idea what order to put them in, which is why I've put a triple line here denoting the difference to Pearl, which is their permaban, because you can really put these maps in any kind of order, and Vitality's map pool is very strange where they aren't necessarily like completely dominant on any map. They're just kind of very good to good, like everywhere. Which honestly is a very good position to be in, right? Like you have 6 maps that you're at least good on all of them. And so it says Split is 6 here, but you know, we saw them against Foot, for instance, play a masterful game on Split. I don't think that Split is a bad map for Vitality. It's just I've put them in some order and I don't really know what order to put them in, essentially. For G2, their map pool I think is more easy to kind of understand. The one thing about G2 though is, and you can see it here, is that they don't have a permaban, right? So far in Masters Bangkok, they've actually banned 3 different maps for 3 different opponents, and that I think is, you know, quite interesting. Now to me, they do have 2 very clear best maps in Pearl and Abyss. You can put these in either order, but those 2 are very clearly their best maps. They then have 3 maps where, you know, they have played on them, they have won on those maps, but as you see, they're still willing to ban Haven. This was against EDG. And then you've got Bind and Split, and what's weird about Bind and Split for G2 is they've only played both of those maps once, and they both were losses for G2. So those 2 I've put here at the bottom. And this makes a map pool, you know, quite interesting here because Vitality are coming in with a big advantage that they're going to permaban Pearl, and that's one of G2's best 2 maps, right? So that's obviously a pretty big advantage right there. When you're choosing the ban, though, for G2, it's not quite as easy. I'm going to go with Bind here. Going on from there, I think Fracture is a pretty good pick here for Vitality, but again, they're pretty open here in terms of what they could pick. You know, they could go Split if they wanted to. As I say, this is 6, but it's not really a normal 6. For G2, I think the pick is pretty obviously going to be Abyss. From there, though, again, the map veto gets quite interesting. I've gone for a ban of Lotus here, but this is a thing, as I say, with Vitality, where they could ban Split here. They could even ban Haven here if they wanted to, right? If they've got some good prep on some of these other maps. And then I've gone for the Split ban here as the second ban for G2, being one of their, you know, kind of maps they want to avoid a lot of the time. And we play Haven, right? But I do think that when you look at the way this map veto goes, I do think it is slightly favored for Vitality. The fact that their permaban is definitely one of G2's best maps. And then G2 will kind of be forced to play into maps that probably Vitality overall are just slightly better than, you know, what we've seen so far with G2. So I would give kind of a slight edge here to Vitality. But it is definitely a very slight edge. I would give Vitality, you know, maybe a 53-47 is what I'm going to go with here. And say the G2 are the tails here at 47%. But we'll see what the result is. And it is heads again. And so I would have EDG and Vitality going through just there, and now we'll spend a little bit of time on the other games, but not as much, and kind of talk about the teams in general. For T1 versus G2, G2 are at a pretty, I would say, unlucky situation where the other 3 teams that have qualified through to this stage all ban one of Pearl or Abyss. For T1 in particular, though, Pearl is also one of their best maps, so this would be a super interesting veto if we did get this game, and because G2 are probably just better than T1, I would still probably give this like a 65-35 chance. So to the coin we go, 35% chance here for T1, but the result is heads. And so now let's come to EDG versus Team Vitality, and this one is super interesting because both of their permabans are kind of okay maps for the other team, but not one that I think they'd be super disappointed that left. And actually in my rankings, I had Fracture, Haven, and Bind as the top 3 maps in some order for both of these teams. So it probably would come down to who has maybe the best top-end map pool, which I would say is EDG, right? I do think the Vitality have a lot of very solid, you know, very good maps, but not necessarily maybe a great map, right? We've seen from EDG 13-0s on Haven, right? We've seen them destroy teams on Fracture. So I do think that if we did end up in kind of that upper echelon of both teams' map pool, that EDG have just shown a bit more on kind of the very top of their map pool than Vitality. And so for that, I would call this probably like, again, a very close game though. So I'm going to give Vitality also 47% because it would still be towards the top of their map pool as well, and they very easily could win. So let's toss here with EDG as slight favorites. And this one again is heads, and I promise you, if you're wondering that, you know, if it doesn't change, no, it does change, but that we got heads again. So that would give us EDG into the grand final, and then the lower final, let's just do that same coin toss that we did before 53-47. So, here we go. Can G2 overcome it here in the lower final? Yes, they can. That we get a tails, and so G2 beat Vitality in the lowers. So go through G2, and then we would get EDG versus G2. But the thing is now, EDG would also have a double map ban, which of course would probably be Abyss, and honestly maybe Pearl or whatever map. If G2 have gotten good at a map throughout, you know, they could probably ban that as well, EDG. So they would go in, I think, pretty sizable favorites, being, you know, already the world champions with a double map veto on G2, who would then have to, you know, play a bunch of maps that they maybe aren't super comfortable with. Now, they don't have a permaban, but they're still going to have to play maps that they normally wouldn't go to. Still, I'm only going to call this a 60-40. I would still give G2 a chance, considering that they do still play all of the other maps, and you never know how a grand final might go. But let's go 60-40, and it is EDG. And so there you go. The weighted coin says EDG will win Masters Bangkok. So that is my pick'em here for Masters Bangkok. Let me know what you think of it down below, and I will see you tomorrow for a very exciting tournament.